The topic we have before us is Europe in the Indo-Pacific. And we all know that the European Union and many of its member states have developed strategies in recent years to step up engagement with the Indo-Pacific, itself a newish label for this entire region. These strategies have acknowledged the importance of Indo-Pacific to Europe's own growth and trade and economic security. But we've also seen increasing US-China economic rivalry, and there have been some concerns about security in Europe's own neighbourhood, which obviously have raised questions as to whether Europe really has any time to focus on the Indo-Pacific. And so what we'd like to do is to explore the implications of some of that. I intend to ask each of our ministers here a question. There may be a follow-up, but the idea thereafter is to involve you all. As usual, Tanubi, are you going to be playing traffic cop and noting the questioners for me?
No, we'll roam around with the mic.
Roam around with the mic and give them the mic, okay. Yeah. Fine. We have a very impressive panel here, I'm very pleased to say. We have Dominique Hasler, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Education and Sport of Liechtenstein. We have Kajsa Ollongren, who is the Minister of Defense of the Netherlands. We don't have, as was advertised earlier, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Romania, who in the end is only arriving tomorrow morning. We do have Minister of State for the Commonwealth and the United Nations of the United Kingdom, Lord Tariq Ahmed. We have right next to me Vladislav Teofil Bartoszewski, Secretary of State in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Poland. So it's a good cross-section. I don't know if any of the Europeans are going to object to Lord Ahmed's inclusion after Brexit, but I think we've so far heard no objections. So, but European in the broader sense of the term, I'm sure is accepted. So we may start with you, Minister Hasler. I do know that very recently, in fact, just November, Liechtenstein took over the presidency of the Committee of Ministers within the Council of Europe, which is a 6-month assignment. So you're about halfway through it now, just over halfway through it. You had, during your address, highlighted that the country's priorities during its presidency would be guided by the motto, united by our values towards a better future for the needs of all. Now, as a chair of Europe's foremost human rights organization, and as a leading politician, a former teacher and educator who's been working with stakeholders to shine light on the humanitarian implications of the Ukraine invasion, how would you assess the continent's response to the humanitarian tragedy that was caused in Ukraine and the surrounding countries? Do you still believe that the commitment to a common set of values that you've said is at the core of the European Union remains as strong as it did prior to this war and prior, for that matter, to the COVID pandemic? I have to say, before you respond, that on COVID, it was rather startling that amongst the first two victims of COVID were European solidarity and the Schengen arrangement. European solidarity seemed to have collapsed when you all sealed your borders with Italy, when the first cases erupted there, denying them essential supplies, and then the Schengen arrangements disappeared and border controls went up for many, many months during the COVID pandemic. So where is the solidarity then? Where was the solidarity then? Where is it now? Floor is yours.
So first of all, thank you very much for inviting me to this wonderful panel. I think it shows very symbolically how a really small country with 40,000 inhabitants can have a strong relationship with a country like India, with its huge population, its geographical position, its economic growth prospects, and its increasing skilled workforce. So it is very important, those bilateral relationships for a small country like Liechtenstein. And as mentioned, I'm very thankful to be here. In my capacity as having the presidency of the Council of Europe and coming back to your country, I just want to highlight the topic of solidarity. And you mentioned solidarity in the context of crisis, be it the pandemic, be it war. So I do believe that the Council of Europe is a living example for how we in partnership can share values and we can protect values, especially in the Council of Europe. The Court of the Human Rights does have a crucial role. But I think solidarity is not something which is for granted, neither in the Council of Europe nor in other international forums. Liechtenstein is a very, very strong supporter of multilateralism. So we have a huge engagement within the UN and also within bodies like the Council of Europe. We have within our presidency, of course, the goal that we have to strengthen our values, but not only within Europe, but also in other forums, like I mentioned, the UN. And therefore, I think it is so important that we do not separate between Europe and other parts of the world. We do not separate between small countries and big countries. I do believe that solidarity is based on it needs everybody. And this is why we have a strong commitment to multilateralism within Europe, but also within the United Nations. And this is also why I'm so thankful and grateful to be here today. But let us all engage every day in a political responsibility for more solidarity, and let us just be solidarity, not only a word, let it be a living example. And I think this format, the Raisina Dialogue, is a living example for how diplomacy can work and how solidarity can work. I remember yesterday when we had the beginning of the conference, there was this claim, diplomacy needs a rendezvous. So let us have rendezvous, a lot of rendezvous every day.
I'm going to push back a little bit on that because you've said all the right things, but it's what the Americans call motherhood and apple pie. What about Hungary, for example? Are you still happy with European solidarity after Ukraine?
So perhaps let me just first explain the relationship between Liechtenstein and the EU. We are not a member of the EU, we are a member of the EEA. And for Liechtenstein, the participation within the single market is a very, very important one, of course, but I think Minister Lindner is more specialized in that, of course. Also in Europe, we have heterogeneous situations on topics. But for example, if you mention Hungary, within the EEA, we do have also a compensation mechanism where we really try to have cooperation with all countries within Europe. So also there, Liechtenstein tries to be a reliable partner. But although we have different opinions within Europe, I think we reached until now huge consensus. We reached a lot of difficult goals. We are not in an easy situation in Europe, be it on an economic, but also on a solidarity level. I'll come back to solidarity here again. But as I mentioned, diplomacy is a rendezvous, and of course we have a lot of rendezvous also in Europe this time, those days.
All right, I'll leave that there for now, but we'll probably come back to the conversation. Minister Ollongren, if I may ask you, in November 2020, the Netherlands became just the third country in Europe to announce a strategy for the Indo-Pacific after France and Germany, in no small part on account of a growing uneasiness, we understood, with China's increasing assertiveness in this important strategic theatre. Now, from a military perspective, the Netherlands, along with Germany, deployed military vessels to the Indo-Pacific region in 2021, also participated in joint exercises with Singapore and Japan, along with others, last year. What's the message that you believe the Netherlands and the EU at large is hoping to send through these deployments? Excuse me. And do you believe that these multilateral military partnerships can help contain the fire-breathing dragon, or are we looking at a scenario where more actors are being announced in a strategic corridor that's already been caught up a little bit in the confluence of competing interests and geopolitical tensions?
Well, thank you for that question. That's a very interesting question. I think also a very important one. I'm also glad to be here in this European panel. And I think our presence here today also shows the importance that we do attach to the region. And I think it comes natural to the Netherlands and also to Europe and the European Union for two reasons. The first reason is, I think, simple. It's about global trade. It's about the freedom of navigation. It's about the importance of many countries in this region to us. If you look at economic partnerships or for economic giants in this region, and India is one of them, that we attach great value to. And therefore, we have to be able to continue exports and trade and imports, and that's via the sea. So the oceans are the arteries of global trade, and they need to be open and accessible. So that's the first reason to engage in this part of the world for us. And the second one is perhaps more negative, if you wish. It is that we cannot afford not to engage in the Indo-Pacific. If you look at the world and threats to stability and to peace, of course we feel threatened now by the large-scale war that is raging in Ukraine, which is on our continent, which just borders the European Union and NATO territory. But it's certainly not the only threat that we are facing. If we look at threats worldwide, instability in this region would be a big threat also to European peace and security. And that's why we want to engage, why we need to have situational awareness. And to get that situational awareness, you have to engage. And one way to engage is sending a vessel. You mentioned the one that we sent 3 years ago. And when I started as a minister 2 years ago, I decided that every second year we will engage and we will send one of our ships to do the route here and to engage as much as possible by participating in exercises and doing port visits, etc. And so we are, the Tromp, that's the name of the ship, is starting its voyage next month. And we'll do what the Evertse did 3 years ago, and we will do that on a regular basis. And I think it is, for us, is the way to get the situational awareness and to understand much better what is happening here, and also to work together and through these exercises and through these visits and encounters to have a much better understanding both ways of how we can cooperate and how we should engage. So naval activity for us is taking part in promoting and improving maritime security in this region. So I hope that is an answer to your question.
Yes, but you rightly mentioned that you've all been focused, understandably, a lot on Ukraine. To what degree is that a distraction from, for example, pursuing the EU cooperation strategy on the Indo-Pacific?
Well, I think we live in a world where we don't have the luxury to focus just on one conflict. If we were to focus only on the war in Ukraine and forget about the rest of the world, we would also forget that it's all connected. And that the war in Ukraine and the Russian aggression, we're seeing it elsewhere as well. We're seeing that Russia can pursue this war because they also depend on certain countries. I would mention here North Korea, for instance, and also Iran, for weapons. It also affects us because we know that Russia is active in the Sahel region, in Africa, where there is poverty, where there's terrorism, and that can also affect us in Europe. So these things are connected. We cannot just let go of other parts of the world because we are now so much focused on Ukraine. We are focused on Ukraine because we know that they cannot fight this war and they cannot win this war without our support. So what we're doing is increasing our defense production, increasing our ammunition production, making sure that we are there to train, to provide them with spare parts, with ammunition, everything they need. But it does not distract us from the other parts in the world. I think also we are a member of NATO. United States is, of course, the biggest NATO ally. The United States has also always had an interest in this part of the world. So that means that if you look at the map and at the globe, you can actually connect the dots. It's very easy to see it. So we do not and we must not turn a blind eye to this region.
Fair enough. Let me turn to you, Lord Ahmed. In a report published by a committee of the House of Commons in October 2023 on the topic of the Indo-Pacific, was UK defence and the Indo-Pacific. The committee, while commending the government on its efforts in shoring up bilateral partnerships with India and Japan, and joining multilateral partnerships like the AUKUS, the Australia-UK-US partnership, raised a number of issues that are probably relevant to this conversation. On the one hand, it agreed with the government's assessment that China represented an epoch-defining and systemic challenge, but particularly raised concern over the issue of Taiwan. And I quote from the report, "It appears that China intends to confront Taiwan, whether by direct military action or grey zone attacks in the coming years." And it urged the government to develop a concrete response. It also pointed out, you may disagree, that the UK's regional military presence in the Indo-Pacific remains limited and that the strategy to which it contributes is unclear. Not my words, it's theirs. So as a strong advocate of expanding the UK's ties with the Indo-Pacific, including as reflected in your many personal visits to the region, including to India earlier this year in January, how do you respond to these findings of the committee, particularly its assessment that the UK government's future strategy in the Indo-Pacific is still unclear?
Well, thank you, Shashi, and it's always good to be on a panel with you. I think the pleasing thing for any government is when a committee scrutinises, and you'll know from your own esteemed example of being a parliamentarian, of course you're there to challenge government. So I think it's encouraging for any government that it started with recognising what the UK government has done in the Indo-Pacific. And of course, in terms of some of its findings, I would challenge it. But just before I do that, I can't let it go that you refer to Brexit and the United Kingdom's departure from the European Union. We are European in terms of our continent and our geography, and of course we continue to cooperate with our European partners. And whether the Indo-Pacific is important or not, I say to, utter the words as we've heard from the Defence Minister just now, from the Netherlands, that if it wasn't important, we would not be here. And this underlines the extent and indeed what the Raisina Dialogue has really become for India. Equally, I think our cooperation with the European Union partners on important issues, you mentioned about Ukraine, the coordination in the Middle East, I'm the Middle East Minister, has been immense and intense. Our coordination on sanctions against Russia. Sanctions work when you work together. We work with the US, we work with the EU. And a practical step, and here's where I fly the British flag. You talked about the EU and the COVID response. I think the COVID response was also quite defining in terms of the British relationship with India. There's an old phrase which you will know, a friend in need is a friend indeed. When the United Kingdom needed India, India stepped forth. We were running out of paracetamol. India provided. When India needed oxygen supplies, the United Kingdom stepped forth. And the essence of any relationship is people. We have 1.7 million people in the United Kingdom of Indian heritage. I was part of that operation. In 48 hours, we leveraged that and delivered the oxygen to India. So I would say that our relationship with India on a bilateral basis and also in the Indo-Pacific is a very strong one. Picking up on the specifics, I think we would all agree, and our hosts here in India would agree, that China presents a challenge. It presents a challenge, as you said, in issues such as Taiwan, where we're very clear that that's an issue which needs to be resolved by both sides on the Taiwan Straits. But at the same time, we have a trading relationship with Taiwan, which is fruitful, and I think that needs to be both protected and strengthened. Equally, where we have to challenge China on issues of human rights, for example, with their treatment of the Uyghur community, we challenge China, and again, we work with our European partners in this respect. Year on year, the challenge to China at the Human Rights Council, at the Third Committee of the UN, which you know well, has seen an increase in numbers. And actually, just as an aside here, there are Muslim countries here in the room and beyond. It's also important when we see persecution of religious communities, come forth, stand forth. And actually, the countries that are making up that combination and alliance against China on human rights is predominantly European. So we need to broaden that. And you also mentioned about China and defense specifically. I would challenge that last report. We had a very big fleet here during 2021, the whole essence of our naval cooperation. I'm here in India at the same time as our first Sea Lord. When we had that particular carrier force here in 21, it's coming again in 25. We had the first Raksha Mantri visit for 23 years, Defence Minister to the UK this year. We had External Affairs Minister, a great friend of mine, Minister Jay Shankar, visiting the United Kingdom. You know also that what brings me here is we're hoping to complete a strong trading relationship through the FTA. We do £38 billion worth of trade with India alone. The Indo-Pacific is important to us. The CPTPP that we signed, £1 trillion market. We are a strategic dialogue partner on ASEAN. So I hope in my comments that there is a sufficient rebuttal to what the committee says. We do have a strategy for the Indo-Pacific and the facts to prove it.
All right, you made a robust defense. I can't help resisting when I heard you say, I can't resist saying when I heard you say that the UK is cooperating with the continent. That famous Daily Mail headline, "Fog in the Channel, Continent Isolated," which sort of reminded me that those attitudes in many, many ways emerged once again in Brexit. But that's not the question I want to ask you.
Okay.
On COVID, you can respond to both in any case, but on COVID, I read about 3 months ago in the international press, maybe a little more than that the UK was going to throw away an inordinately large number, in the millions, of unused vaccines because they were about to expire. And the article pointed out essentially that the UK had been hoarding more vaccines than its population needed at a time when countries around the world, including in the Indo-Pacific and also in Africa, could have used them. So the question that comes up is, yes, a lot of COVID solidarity, you give an excellent example of India, but in the larger sense, was there still not an indication during COVID of countries saying our own people first, even to the extent of going beyond what they really needed?
I think its honest response to that is, of course, countries have to protect their own citizens. It's the first duty of any government. And I defy any minister sitting here that your first duty, incumbent, is the security of your own citizens. But the United Kingdom, I'm very proud. It was under Prime Minister Boris Johnson, and many may not remember, but he himself fell victim to COVID. Immediately after coming out of his own he was about to be put on a ventilator. He survived, thankfully, he came out. And one of the first things he did was set up the COVAX facility. We immediately funded that COVAX facility, not because it just mattered to the UK. We funded it directly. Why? Because we knew that the vaccine issue, the issue of COVID, was not just about one country or one community. It was a collective. It was a collective world challenge. It was an epidemic of proportions, a pandemic of proportions in each country, and an epidemic in every sense of society. What we needed to do was address that, and that's why the COVAX facility, we both funded it and helped provided it. And a final point, if I may, on that, let us not forget that the association and India did an incredible job in vaccine provision. But it was the academics at Oxford, the initial facilitation through AstraZeneca, and then the people-to-people links with the Serum Institute that allowed us to share our academic basis. The private sector came forward through AstraZeneca, and again, a link with the Netherlands here as well, but also importantly, the manufacturing capacity of the biggest pharmaceutical manufacturer in the world, which was India. So actually, yes, we cared about our citizens, and rightly so, but that didn't mean that we didn't care about others.
Fair enough. Many, many thanks. Tobias, Minister Lindner, Germany and China, we seem to be seeing since the last decade a cooling of the very deep economic ties and partnerships you've shared with these two countries. The Belt and Road Initiative is a recent example, and the growing range of issues of divergence have included, if I've got it right, a denial to a Chinese company to purchase a sensitive German company, divergences on Hong Kong and Taiwan, the South China Sea, and of course you have diversified your relationships in the Indo-Pacific by strengthening partnerships with those key regional players who are democracies and partners with shared values. But on the one hand, China still remains an indispensable, in fact, very large trading partner of yours. On the other hand, some are seeing an increasing tilt towards other countries in the Indo-Pacific, including in terms of the military presence. Your frigate Bayern was here. What is exactly Germany's overall strategy and national outlook vis-a-vis China and the rest of the Indo-Pacific?
Thank you so much, and thanks for having me again. And great question, because you know that's mainly what my work is about during the last few months and the last 2 years. And I would say, we have learned hard lessons out of our dependency when it came to fossil fuels from Russia. For too long, many Germans believed you can separate your economic ties and your political issues with the country, and that has been proven wrong. And we have learned our lessons. So when it comes to China, we have recently adopted our first China strategy as German government. And that means that we are looking at China in 3 dimensions. First of all, we believe in some areas of policy, there needs to be even partnership. When it comes, for instance, fighting climate change, you can only do climate action with one of the biggest emitters on the planet. China is a permanent member of the Security Council, so for some things, you still need to cooperate with them. At the same time, you elaborated on the economic ties. I do not have anything against competition as long as it is fair and on a level playing field. And I have no problem that German automobile companies, for instance, earn a large revenue of their shares on the Chinese market. I've told them, okay, it's fine if you sell your products there, but it becomes a problem if you would go bankrupt, if the market access at one point would suddenly be stopped. And I expect from you to prepare for such a scenario. Let's hope that it never comes, but you need to be prepared for the worst case. But last but not least, we see our relationship to China, and it's becoming a more and more important factor to be in front of the background of something we call systemic rivalry, meaning that China is questioning the international rules-based order. You mentioned the Belt and Road Initiative, but we have to take into account that China more and more also questions things like the United Nations Convention of the Law of the Sea, for instance, with respect to the South China Sea. And that means we need to prepare and we need to diversify. We are diversifying our economic ties in both directions when it comes to the supply chains, be it on rare materials, be it on semiconductors, be it on pharmaceuticals. But we also have to diversify our export markets and our markets where we can do our foreign investments, and India is a great opportunity for that. And with respect to the whole Indo-Pacific, we are strengthening our global partnerships, as we call them, especially with India, with which we have a strategic partnership, and we're looking forward to intergovernmental consultations later on this year. And we are looking for, let's say, partnerships that cover the whole spectrum of policy, not cherry picking, not doing just economics and ignoring difficult issues like security. And I can announce that this year, again, we will deploy a frigate and a support ship to the whole region. It will go through to the Korean Peninsula, also to show that we have an interest in monitoring sanctions against North Korea. But it will also, for instance, visit the port of Goa and do a harbor visit, pay a harbor visit, a port visit here in India. We will also be deploying the Air Force also to an exercise to India, and that proves that our military presence here in the region, it's not a one-stopper. We will do it on an annual basis, sometimes with the Air Force, sometimes with the Army, sometimes with the Navy, but we know that our own security is intertwined with the security situation here in the Indo-Pacific, and therefore we need to care about.
A comment and a question. Audible? Is sound gone? Yeah, okay. The comment is when you said at the very beginning that, yes, China is such a big country, we need to cooperate with it. Reminded me of something my old boss at the UN, Kofi Annan, would tell me. You never hit a man on the head when you've got your fingers between his teeth. And if you think about that, it's a very, very wise way of talking about our dependence on some powerful countries, even if we have problems with them. Now, the question I have for you is, I hear everything you say, and yet China is, after all, in many ways, seen as aiding and abetting Russia throughout this Ukraine crisis. How does that affect your approach to them? You talk about the military, you talk about your frigate, and so on and so forth, but you are also doing a lot in your own neighborhood vis-a-vis the Ukraine conflict. And again, how does that affect the overall EU strategy for cooperation in the Indo-Pacific? Same question. The second part is the same one that I asked Minister Ollengren.
So first of all, on the teeth, that's why we are just pulling out the teeth at the moment, because I totally agree. You know, if there are fields where you need to cooperate, and I speak not, it's not a wish list. you have to be clear that that there are no dependencies in terms of other things where you can be put under pressure. With respect what we can do in the Indo-Pacific, you know, Russia's invasion in Ukraine is not something which is just happening in our own backyard and where the world does not need to take care about. It's a blatant violation of the international rules-based order. I know that especially in India, you have witnessed in your history what territorial integrity and sovereignty means, and you and the Indians, they have learned the lessons out of it. And at the same time, it shows us, because many Germans had been naive for too long when it came to Russia, it tells us that there shouldn't be any forgotten crisis on this planet. So the idea, let's focus on Ukraine and try to get it solved and don't care what's happening in the Indo-Pacific because it's far away. That's totally wrong. Our security, as I said, is intertwined with your security here, as we know that your food prices, your energy prices are affected by the Russian invasion in Ukraine. And that's the reason why we need to take care about both. And I'm happy that we are doing it. I'm happy that we have been able to approve that first China strategy ever in German history last year, in the second year of the Russian invasion in Ukraine. And I think that's the proof.
Thank you, Minister Lender. And finally, Secretary Bartoszewski. Unlike Germany, of course, Poland has been a member of BRL, has also been a member of the 16+1 format for cooperation between China and BRI is what I meant to beg your pardon. Been a member of the 16+1 format for cooperation between China and Central and Eastern Europe. So for many decades, commentators have highlighted a pragmatic angle to Poland's relations with China, which seem to be driven largely by the desire to strengthen and deepen your trade and investment cooperation with Beijing. But with your recent political changes at home and a growing concern about relations with China across Europe, are we likely to witness a reassessment of that relationship? Is there talk of a new de-risking strategy, as there is in some other countries? And does this have implications for Poland's strategy towards the Indo-Pacific?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. It is true that Polish relationship with China is pragmatic, as it should be, because we are a small country facing a very large country. And in terms of our involvement with China, the 16 plus, of which we are a member, is de facto a 14 plus, and this format did not fulfill its expectations. So we together with quite a few other countries, are not very active members in it because it doesn't work properly. In terms of our commercial involvement in China, we did not make huge investments in China, to which the minister referred to in case of German companies. So it's neither these Chinese made huge investments in Poland. In terms of trade, like everybody else in the world, we have a huge imbalance. In other words, our exports to China are a fraction of our imports from China. So it's not a satisfactory long-term situation. So yes, we are looking at it pragmatically, but we are also engaging very much more in the Indo-Pacific region, because there's one thing which we share with India and some other countries in the region, is that we accept the international law-based order, which started in the United Charter after 45. Thanks to that charter and thanks to that order, India dropped its colonial status and became a republic. And we all benefit from these values, core principles of international order, that is territorial integrity, non-use of force, sovereignty, and so on. And we are certainly not going to abandon that approach. We think that the world is interconnected, as my predecessor said, and we think we are now facing a situation that a war in Europe, which some people here may think as regional, is nothing but, because it affects Indo-Pacific as well. Because imagine a situation that Ukraine loses this war. What implication is going to have for the neighbors of various countries here? I mean, it emboldens behavior of countries which think that may take over by force and an independent sovereign nation. No, we've got more in common with the Indo-Pacific region and with India, because we do not foresee a policy which is not based on the international order.
At the same time, you've hosted an enormous number of Ukrainian refugees. I'm sure you can give us the exact number. The largest, if I'm not mistaken, of the Ukrainian refugee population is in your country. And the question that comes from that is, of course, if the war continues the way it's going, and there is a possibility of even a worsening if there are changes in Washington, and you get a new influx of refugees, will this undermine your commitment to collective European approach on some of these questions that are beyond your immediate concerns in Europe, such as the Indo-Pacific?
Just the opposite. I think we have taken a very large number of Ukrainian refugees. At the moment, it's about 1 million new refugees. All of them have a right to work. All of them have social security. All of them have access to healthcare. All of them have children have access to education, and we intend to continue with this approach. But we also have support. We offered military support to Ukraine. I mean, the first few months of the war, we gave Ukraine 300 tanks and quite a few other things. But we have full support of our friends and neighbors in the EU and in NATO. And we are having a united policy towards this, and should, God forbid, be a total in another crisis, we will accommodate the refugees, but we are going to steadfastly resist the Russian invasion. And we cooperate with our friends in the Netherlands and in Germany to that effect. We are planning to increase military spending, because Russia currently spends over 8% of its GDP on arms. This is a level of the Second World War. And Germany used to spend, in the days of Chancellor Brandt, Social Democrat, used to spend 3.1% on arms and had 700,000 foreign troops on its soil and had peace and security. And we are going to, unfortunately, probably to this direction, but we are going to do it together with our friends and allies. We work completely, very closely. I was 3 weeks ago, I was in Germany talking to various government officials, including Minister Pistorius, Minister of Defense, and we fully agreed that this is the road we are going to follow. But that doesn't deflect us from having close links with Indo-Pacific, including particularly with India, the largest democracy in the world, with whom we are also discussing now various links. For instance, with the Poles now are discussing links with cybersecurity with India, with South Korea, with Australia, with New Zealand, and other countries which accept the international order set up after 45.
Thank you very much. We're going to open this up to the audience for the last little while. I should warn you that this is also predominantly a Raisina Young Fellows gathering, and they're the ones going to be asking. Whoever gets the mic gets to ask the question. As simple as that. I'm not going to pick from here. So draw his attention, and you'll get the mic. Go ahead.
So hi, my name is Mo, and I'm part of the Raisina Young Fellowship. And first of all, I find it remarkable that we're all here in India to discuss kind of like a European relationship, and I think it shows how remarkable the position India have in building bridges in different areas. And my question actually is that I think we all understand that we need to balance between values, but between economical and trade and security interest. But one thing I'm curious about is the private sector, because I think we definitely need to address that. For example, in Europe, we have more Chinese vehicles that collecting data more than any other European brands. On the other hand, we have the richest man in the world that owns more satellites than any other country and providing connectivity to Ukraine. So in a way, we also need to address what is the part of corporates and the private sectors that actually acts like a state. And I'm very curious to hear your point of view.
Minister, sorry, I should have said we'll take 5 questions and invite the 5 of you to answer. If a particular minister has not been specified by the questioner, you can choose whether you wish to answer it or not, and we'll try and ensure each of you gets at least one answer out. Okay, next one.
So, sorry, my question is, sorry, I'm Will on the Raisina.
Can you hold the mic a bit closer?
I'm Will on the Raisina Young Fellows program as well. So my question is, so prior to the Ukraine invasion, there was somewhat of a sort of maybe a disbelief or a disinterest from the EU, maybe a disbelief that Russia would follow through with its invasion. You know, even in the sort of face of increasing coercive grey zone behaviour. Following the invasion, obviously this is an issue that affects all of you deeply, you've all spoken about it. Are there any lessons for Indo-Pacific countries, which they could learn from your experience in the face of the sort of deteriorating strategic environment that we face today? Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Yuka from Japan, and I'm working at a Japanese startup that creates the job for refugees. And I'm so interested to know more about the asylum seekers, seeking system and process for how to be refugees. Like in Japan, we have different process for the Ukraine refugees and other countries refugees, Afghanistan, Syria, and African countries. And then I was impressed, Polish system has work permit for them and also education support. So is that all? Is that providing to all refugees or specifically for Ukraine? And if you have any information about that, I would like to know about that.
Yes, go on, two more.
Thank you, Kira. Thank you for German Council on Foreign Relations. Since this is a session on the Indo-Pacific, I wanted to ask a question about the Indo-Pacific Ocean, which is acidifying, warming, sea levels are rising. How does climate security feature in your assessment of the regional security, and how does the loss of biodiversity and the changes in the ocean affect this assessment? Thank you.
All right. One more. Okay.
Hi everyone, I'm Roberto Italia from think tank ISPI, and we had panels before about the risking from China and also climate finance. And we know that in Europe we have Green Deal, Repower targets, and then all the discussion about industrial packages to the risk from China. So my question is, isn't the EU trying to do too many things at the same time? Meanwhile, we don't have the investment tools to build up capabilities. And meanwhile, also, we do not know how to deal with structural challenges we have, like the immigration flows from the other side of the Mediterranean Sea. Thank you.
Okay. Now, I'm going to go back to the same order in which we conducted this thing and ask each minister to pick one of the 5 questions that remain and answer it. Dominique Hasler, would you like to take anyone?
So now I have the difficulties to choose one. Perhaps.
Oh, you can choose more than one if you like.
Okay, so I will answer to 2 questions.
Yeah, sure.
Perhaps first of all, I want to mention how happy I am that we have this fellow program here. I'm also Minister of Education. I think it's so important that we have you as the future engagers and the future ministers and the future shapers of our challenges here at this conference. Let me perhaps start with the question about how important it is to integrate the private sector. I just can give you an example from the Principality of Liechtenstein. We are in a constant exchange with the private sector, how we can create better framework for them, especially also the economic area. And I can just tell you that for them, the Indo-Pacific area is one of the main priorities. If we listen to them, we hear the cooperation with the Indo-Pacific is as important as ever before. So we have a lot of projects together also with the private sector in this region. And as you said, it is of huge importance to involve them in the discussions, but also to hear from them where they future strategics are going on, and there I'm quite happy that the goal and the aims are clear, that they want to invest more, especially also in the Indo-Pacific region. And then I have a follow-up to the question from Japan, related to the refugees in Europe. I just want to mention for Liechtenstein, it's very, very important that we do not separate between refugees. Everybody who needs protection is welcome in Liechtenstein and has the same right. And now you just allow me to have shortly my head as Minister of Education on. I think education is playing a crucial role when it comes to integration, and there we give the right for everybody from the first day on, and I think a lot of European countries does the same to integrate them into the school system. We produce special pedagogical methods because, of course, yeah, we have a lot of refugees at the moment in Europe, but it's our obligation to give them direct access to the education system, and therefore I'm also very thankful that we are in a good exchange between our partners within Europe to reach this goal. And I think there we do have all the same aims, but also the same responsibility.
Thank you, Minister Kaiser.
Yes, thank you very much. I'll respond to two questions, I think, starting with the lessons for the Indo-Pacific, what we saw happening in Ukraine. And of course, I'm the Minister of Defense, but we also have to take into consideration that the best defense is not done merely by military. The best defense is cooperation, international cooperation. I think that is our best security against war and aggression. And that is exactly, I think, what we learned from the Ukraine war that is happening now. It didn't start 2 years ago. It started 10 years ago. It started with the annexation of Crimea. It started with the war in Donbass. So Ukraine has been in this war for 10 years now. And I think the lesson for everyone around the world is that the response that you give matters. And the response that came after the large-scale invasion 2 years ago was a very firm response. And we should not forget that Putin has not reached any of his strategic goals that he had at that time. He wanted to take Kiev to hold a victory parade. They're still waiting for that, and it's not going to happen. And why is it not going to happen? Because Ukraine resists, and because Ukraine has partners and allies to supply them with what they need to fight this war. And their motivation is very strong, because what are they fighting for? They're fighting for their freedom. They're fighting for their right to self-determination. They're fighting for their will to be part of the European family, to be part of NATO in the future. So they know what they're fighting for. Whereas the Russians, I'm not so sure that they even know that there is an actual war going on. So there's a big difference in that. And I think it means that the world is watching, that also countries who feel that they at some point might also want to invade one of their neighbors, they will be watching how we respond to this crisis and if we have the endurance to continue our support to Ukraine. And also the fact that you need international partnerships. We are a relatively small country inside the European Union. We feel much stronger because we're part of the European Union, because we're part of NATO that we can actually rely on. And then as a defense minister, yes, that means that you also have to invest in your defense. And that means that we have to get our defense industry up to the right level of production. And we have also learned from the COVID pandemic that you cannot wait until it's too late and then start ordering. No, you have to have your stocks filled. And you have to be able to deal with many things at the same time. And I think what is worrying, and that perhaps is the last thing I'd like to say to this audience, this young audience, what is worrying is that defense spending is on the rise everywhere. That is a good thing if we use it only for deterrence. But I think it's also a warning signal. And if you look at this region, the Indo-Pacific region, military expenditure has been on a rise for many, many years now. And that's also something that should make you vigilant and also something that should make you seek these partnerships, because you want to be strong enough to do the deterrence and, if necessary, yes, also, of course, to fight. But I think we should join forces with all those countries who will stand by the UN Charter and who would prefer to have a stronger defense but not to fight.
Thank you, Tariq and Lord Ahmed.
Well, first of all, thank you for your questions. And again, in some of the answers, we're looking towards all of you. You are a generation that both inspires but should also educate. I live by a phrase that from cradle to grave, you seek to be educated, and that's exactly what we should be doing. So all ideas are always welcome. Just picking up on three very quick points. First of all, just agreeing on the private sector. That's instrumental. I came from the private sector. I spent 20 years in banking and corporate finance. But one of the learnings for any government is a facilitation. Why do we engage on FTAs? Because we want to create opportunities for the private sector as part and parcel of strengthening relationships. But within the scope of that, there are parameters to be set. We've scoped China in particular. As we've, yes, like Germany, other European partners, we have strong relations with China when it comes to the economy. But it's the responsibility of government to set the parameters. So, for example, where supply chains are being exploited by modern slavery and human trafficking, we need to ensure that the frameworks provided by government for the private sector are extremely important. I won't dwell on it too long, but we've also got to see this running sort of emerging tide. The minister, defense minister from the Netherlands rightly pointed out to Africa and the role there. We've seen groups such as the Wagner Group, who de facto don't just go in as groups to help a particular group in a particular country militarily. There's a whole economic framework behind them. They have a profit motive. So we've got to be very wary of that. A quick word on Ukraine, if I may. The first thing is mitigation and planning. Crimea was a warning sign. Prior to that, you had Abkhazia and South Ossetia in Georgia, which again were challenged directly by Russia. We, the UK, was one of the countries that called out those early warning signs of Russia's predatory instincts on Ukraine. And of course, when you look at the level of focus, the level of spending economically, militarily, on what's happening in Ukraine, had we acted earlier, could we have deterred Russia? Speculative answer, but I would say yes, because there would have been a sense from Russia, perhaps, that NATO was standing as one. I think we also need to learn from lessons. The withdrawal from Afghanistan by NATO perhaps had also given a quasi-amber light to Russia to say, will NATO act decisively? I think we have demonstrably shown that we do. And that's why we need what's happened through Russia's actions, the likes of Finland. And we hope in the next few days, also Sweden will be joining NATO. Why? Because these countries didn't put it on the fast track to join NATO. They did so because of the fear and now mitigating the risk and the protections that alliances such as NATO provide. And that's why we need to engage in the Indo-Pacific. When we talked about China and we looked at maritime security, there are Chinese research ships in the Indian Ocean. We want to work to share our insights and experience, share with India as a key partner and component part of Indo-Pacific security to ensure that we avert this mitigation again. And a final point on climate, I think it's a right we focus on that. The UK has provided support in this respect. We've put in £500 million, but some of these climate pledges that we put in, particularly in protecting the oceans, on protecting against climate change, these are realities. The Mauritian minister at a dinner last night outlined something quite poignantly, but personally. He said that the beaches he used to play on, which were there when he was a child, no longer existed. It's an existential threat for many countries, especially small island states, and it's a collective effort will help to mitigate the challenge that many countries are facing. It's not just the threat of predatory countries looking to invade, it's the threat of climate change as well.
Very valuable reminder. Thank you. Tobias, Linda.
Thank you so much, and I'd like to start with the question, is the European Union doing too much? And honestly, I doubt, because we cannot deal with the world as we wish it to be. We have to deal with the world as it is, and we are facing a world of multiple crises. So to be frank, we have the challenge of migration in Europe, and it's our common challenge, and we have to treat those people who seek asylum with dignity, and at the same time ensure that there are fair and efficient procedures where their application for political asylum is handled. And we have to distinguish, at the same time, we have a lack of skilled worker migration, especially in my country. That's where we're also cooperating, for instance, with India. And dealing with migration might be the one thing. On the other hand, the global warming doesn't just care about if we have capacities and resources and interest to deal with it or not. In 3-4 decades, global warming doesn't ask the question, oh, have you been occupied with other topics too much? And that brings me to the question about climate policy in the Indo-Pacific. And we have not only just adopted a China strategy, but also a national security strategy where we clearly state out that climate action is security policy. Going to the Indo-Pacific, we see that those countries are much earlier affected by the climate crisis, are harder affected, and that we have to act. Therefore, my country has recently opened an embassy at the Fiji Islands, also to show that the Pacific Island countries are of a special interest of us. We have a large emphasis on international climate action. We have special funds like the International Climate Initiative, and we know it's intertwined, it's interlinked. We have to have a holistic approach, meaning that, for instance, if you go to the Mekong Basin where rice is grown, you have to transform it in a way that, for instance, less water is being used. And we have to keep in mind, as my friend Tariq Ahmad said, we have to keep in mind that sea levels are rising, and we have to prepare for that. Last but not least, what are the lessons learned out of the Russian invasion in Ukraine? And for me, it's be prepared for the worst case, try to cooperate as early as you can, and have also a holistic, a broad understanding what deterrence means. For sure, it means military capabilities. That's why my country, for the first time since 1992, is now going to the 2% in defense spending. At the same time, we have closely coordinated, as European Union, with our British friends as well as with our American friends, sanctions against Russia. And I know that in Beijing, the swift and the robust reaction in terms of economic deterrence, as I would call it, is closely analyzed, examined when it comes to other issues. And that would be my recommendation. Speaking of deterrence means military deterrence as well as economic deterrence in terms of sanctions policies. Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, Vladislav Bartoszewski.
I quickly try to answer two questions. First, on the disbelief, you mentioned that EU media had that Ukraine was invaded. Well, if the media paid attention to some countries in Eastern Europe, they would have been not so disbelieving, because since 2014, the Poles, the Czechs, the Slovaks, the Baltic states knew perfectly well what was going on, and simply nobody believed it. The key for Indo-Pacific is deterrence, but deterrence, as my predecessor said, has different forms. First of all, of course, you have to have the arms. Secondly, you have to have the plans also for sanctions, which can hurt some country more than others. Thirdly, you have to have the will to fight. If you have no will, you can have all the arms you want and you will achieve nothing. You have to have the morale of society, which Ukrainians have. And fourthly, the key is for the potential invader to understand that there will be a response. Russia got zero response after 2014, after taking Donbass, Luhansk, and the Crimea. And the Minsk 1, Minsk 2, they were flops, complete utter flops. And they thought we can do it with impunity in 2022. They did not expect that Europe and NATO and actually 50 countries in the Rammstein program would actually do something. And we did, and that was a big surprise. Should the aggressor know that there will be a reaction, maybe they would have hesitated. So you have to have this friends and allies ready to assist. Secondly, I do with the refugees. Yes, we did take the largest number of Ukrainian refugees in Europe. All in all, we're about 6.5 million went through the country. 500,000 went to North America, and elsewhere about 6 million are in Europe. We have currently 1 million of the new refugees. We had economic migrants earlier, but that's a different category. So we have about 1 million refugees. The way it worked in Poland, we didn't expect this. It was a complete shock to us. And what happened is it's the people who acted. The people show solidarity with the Ukrainian refugees because they felt very sorry. Individuals went to the border. Individuals picked them up in cars and buses. They took them to their homes. To this very day, we don't have a single refugee camp in the country. not a single refugee camp, because they got housed first by the people, then the NGOs stepped in, then the regional government started to help, eventually the central government started to organize things and provided, and one of the key factors was it was absolutely essential that the refugees immediately got work permits. In other words, we did not pay any social security benefits to anybody. They could all work. And now 80% of the refugees are employed. As to the kind of refugees, we didn't have that wave of refugees since the beginning of the century, when after the Second Chechen War, started by no one other by Mr. Putin, we got 80,000 Chechens as refugees. They were culturally not close to us. They were linguistically completely different, and they had a different religion because they were all Muslims, and they got integrated. And some of them went to Germany, well, for looking for better future economically, but some of them are in Poland and they speak Polish and they go to Polish schools and they survive. So no, I mean, I think we have to distinguish. We have a different approach to economic migrants, but different to refugees, and we would take any refugee that we have to accommodate.
Thanks very much for that clarity. My apologies to all of those who raised their hands and couldn't get a question in, but we are way out of time. I'd like to thank the ministers for the very constructive and frank discussion we've all had. Thank you very much.